Hello and welcome. You're watching To The Point. Have the personal and political rifts in the Aam Aadmi Party been patched up or only papered over? That's the key issue I shall discuss with Aam Aadmi Party leader Yogendra Yadav in part 2. But first, it's now confirmed that this year India will have a poor monsoon. It could be as bad as just 89% of the long-term average. In fact, in the northwest, which is the grain basket, it could be as little as 77%. So what does this mean for Indian agriculture and for the Modi government's hopes of economic recovery? And now joining me to talk about the monsoon and its impact on agriculture and the economy is the Director General of the Meteorological Department, L.S. Rathore, the well-known, renowned agricultural scientist, M.S. Swaminathan, a former member of the Planning Commission, Abhijit Sen, and an expert on agriculture and nutrition, Devinder Sharma. Mr. Rathore, let me start by trying to assess how poor the monsoon could be. Your latest prediction is that it will be 93% of the long-term average with a margin of 4% either way, which means that the All India figure could fall to 89%. Am I correct?
Well, this is the error margin of the model, and well, in a sense, it could be 89 too also, plus 4 of 93%.
Quite right. But if the error margin is realized on the low side, then the All India figure could be as low as 89%. Is that correct?
Yeah, if that happens so.
Now, region-wise, the worst affected is the northwest of the country, which comprises roughly Punjab, Haryana, Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh, Delhi, and western UP. Here, the figure you've given as your prediction is 85%, with a margin of error of 8%, which means once again that if the low side is realized, it could be as poor as 77%. Once again, am I correct, sir?
Yes, that's right. But at the same time, this is the region which include, as you mentioned, Rajasthan, Haryana, Punjab, Uttar Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Himachal, and Jammu and Kashmir. And large part of this is irrigated agriculture. For example, Haryana, Punjab, UP is all irrigated, and the paddy which is cultivated in this area is irrigated rice.
So in other words, you're saying the extensive irrigation in this area will mitigate the fact that the monsoon could possibly be as poor as just 77%.
Yes, in terms of the productivity of paddy and other crops, we have seen that during deficient monsoon over Haryana, Punjab and West UP, the production of the irrigated paddy is not impacted negatively. Rather, at times it is seen that because there is no pest disease and also the ample sun radiation available may lead to slight increase in the yield.
Let's for a moment, however, Mr. Rathore, stick to your predictions of the monsoon before we widen to talk about the impact on agriculture and how agriculture can try and contain or make up for the poor monsoon. The third fact that's come across from your comments of yesterday is that today, as of today, rainfall across the country is already 44% below normal, and you don't think this is likely to change in the coming week?
Yes, as of now it is deficient by 43%, but 43% of the first decade of June, where the normal rainfall is just 3.6 centimeter. And against 3.6 centimeter all India, we have received 2 centimeter rainfall. So this looks, the percentage looks inflated, but the amount is very small. Yes, the next week we don't see a very active monsoon, so this deficiency would remain in similar ranges. True.
Remain in similar ranges or possibly increase as well?
Yes, it slightly increase also.
Now finally, you estimate that there's a 70% chance of El Nino in July and August. Could the impact of El Nino be worse than your prediction, making for a greater monsoon deficiency, particularly in August?
Well, in fact, the current prediction has assimilated the likely impact of all the factors, including the Pacific warming, that is what we call as El Nino. So this 93% figure has taken into account the likely impact of the El Nino, which is likely to develop.
That I understand, but what I'm asking, Mr. Rathore, is could El Nino be actually worse than your prediction, and therefore the deficiency greater?
Well, that is as far as prediction is concerned, we are contemplating that like around 0.7 to 1 degree warming, and that is kind of moderate El Nino, and that has been factored into our predictions.
But could it be worse?
Well, it could be anything, worst or good, but what we talk is what we are able to perceive as of now.
All right. Dr. Swaminathan, let's come to what this prediction of the monsoon could mean for actually India's agriculture, and let's try and approach that subject of region by region. Now, in the northwest, which could see just 85% of the long period average, possibly falling on the low side to just 77, that is in fact the grain belt of the country. But as you heard Mr. Rathore say, it's also one of the most highly irrigated parts of the country. So what do you expect will happen to crops like paddy, sugarcane, pulses and cereal which are grown there if you actually have a monsoon deficiency of as low as 77% in the northwest?
You know, by and large, it is not the total rainfall which has influenced it. It is what we call interspell duration, the duration between one rainfall the other, because that's much more important in terms of even spread. Some years we have shortage of total rainfall in quantitative terms, but the qualitative distribution of the rainfall is much more important for agriculture. I think as the DGIMD said, we have nearly 40% of the area under irrigation. So our first task is to see how to maximize the productivity of irrigated lands. Compensatory production programs have to be taken up. And in the rain-fed areas, the general experience has been rainfall does not totally fail, but when it comes, if we can harvest it, if we can make rainwater harvesting mandatory so that every farm has a jal kund or a pond, I think there are ways by which we can minimize in a very effective way the shortage, the purely statistical shortage of total rainfall.
You're making, however, Dr. Swaminathan, a very important point. You're saying it's not the actual quantity of rain that makes an impact so much as the spread and the duration. In other words, even if this depleted monsoon in the northwest, which could be as low as 77% of the long-term average, if it's properly spread out and if there's no huge gaps between the rainfall, you could actually still have fairly good crops. Have I understood that point correctly?
Yes, quite right. You have stated it beautifully. I think what's important is to make sure that the rain which comes, whenever it comes, we try to optimize its benefits. I think it is not total rainfall alone which determines the fate of the crop.
Okay.
Much more the interspell duration.
Now, Professor Sen, in central India, which roughly comprises Madhya Pradesh, Gujarat, Maharashtra, Odisha, Chhattisgarh, the prediction is 94%, falling on the low side to as little as 86%. But here, the irrigation potential is not very good either. Irrigated lands are very few. So what do you believe would be the impact on crops like oil seeds, pulses, paddy and coarse cereals grown here if you actually end up on the low side with just as much as 86% rainfall compared to the long-term average?
Again, I think I'll just repeat what Dr. Swaminathan said. That is, just looking at the rainfall amount is simply not enough. The predictions at the moment are still subject to errors. I mean, the sort of huge margins that you're talking about, 16%, I mean 8% this way and 8% that way, leave a lot of area to be covered. The timing of the rainfall and all the things that Dr. Swaminathan said is important. As far as central India, which is relatively less irrigated, obviously, if the rainfall is much lower there, the impact will also be greater. However, I think we ought to remember that there are things which are being done, and they're probably being done better nowadays than they used to be in the past. Just 2 years ago, nationwide, you had a 7% shortage from normal. And all India output went up by about between 1.5% and 2%. In 2009, all India, you had 23% shortfall from normal. Output went up, GDP from agriculture went up a little bit in that year as well. So a lot of things can be done, and I think the way you're approaching it, by giving, the low side figure and saying that, what would happen if things go wrong? The simple fact is, in the last 10 years, we've had 3 very bad seasons, and we haven't had a single year in which agricultural GDP has been negative.
You're absolutely right. I will definitely in a moment's time turn and talk about what it is we can do, particularly ask you about the steps that were taken in the 2 years that you mentioned so that we can replicate them and ensure that despite a poor monsoon, GDP growth in agriculture does not turn negative. But before I do that, let me turn with Mr. Devinder Sharma to the picture that stares us in the face for South India. The prediction, Mr. Sharma, is that South India will see 93% of the long-term average monsoon rainfall, falling, if it's on the low side, to 85%. Now, what do you think will be the impact on agriculture in South India? Could it be similar to Central India, or do you have better irrigation facilities and patterns in perhaps more akin to Northwest India?
Well, I think if you look at the North India, especially in Punjab, Haryana and Western Uttar Pradesh, you have all the irrigation facilities to really soften the impact of the shortfall in monsoon. In South India, I don't see that kind of a cushion that is available in most of the states and most of the regions. So I think, and also what is more important, Karan, here is that this is the first time they're saying 93%, that's what they're anticipating. But if you remember in 2009, when they said 96% normal, we had a shortfall of about 22% of rain. And so I think we should keep our fingers crossed as far as this is concerned. But more important is, I'm not worried about the GDP, but what worries me is the livelihood of millions of farmers. I think that is what is more important.
I'll come to that in a moment, Simon. That's definitely something I want to take up in a big way. But first, let me go back to Mr. Rathore and put that point made by Mr. Devinder Sharma. He pointed out that, in fact, a couple of years ago, when you predicted, or your predecessors predicted 96%, we ended up with, in fact, a monsoon that was more than 20% deficient. Is there a danger we could head that way this year again?
Well, every monsoon is different, and as far as the prediction of monsoon 2014 is concerned, let us understand that there is a huge consensus by all the prediction centers about the fact that monsoon is going to be below normal. Most of the prediction centers are indicating that.
Forgive me, I'm asking a different question. I'm simply raising the point Mr. Devinder Sharma did, which is that 4 years ago, when it was predicted it would be 96%, it ended up being more than 20% deficient. So it went from 4% deficiency to 20% plus deficiency. Could we head the same way again this year? I mean, I know it's a difficult thing for you to forecast, but I'm simply asking, what's the possibility?
I think we are more confident this year.
You're more confident this year, all right? One other quick question before I come back. I noticed that for the Northeast, you're actually predicting 99% of the long-term average. And if you this time end up on the high side, you could end up with 107% of the long-term average. Could states like Bihar and Assam possibly, conceivably witness floods?
Yes, there is a possibility, because in a situation like this, there is more often than not extreme precipitation events, episodic, which occurs in the Himalayan region, leading to floods downstream. Yes, it is possibility.
Now, Dr. Swaminathan, I want to put two questions to you. The Business Standard today says that, in fact, 85 important reservoirs across the country have what the paper calls comfortable water storage positions. How much of a mitigating factor would that be if we are facing a poor monsoon?
Not able to hear.
Can you
Not
hear me?
able to hear you.
Can you hear me now, Dr. Swaminathan?
I can now hear. Please go ahead.
Today's Business Standard says that 85 important reservoirs across the country have comfortable water storage positions. How much of a mitigating factor is that when we face a poor monsoon? No, I don't think Mr. Swaminathan can hear us. Let me put that very quickly to you, Professor Sen. If you heard that question, how much of a mitigating factor would that be?
I think a great deal. The problem is that in South India, that's slightly less true. But the rest of the country, we've got very good reservoir position, and that should be a matter which again adds to confidence.
Now, something else that the Agriculture Ministry has recently announced, Professor Sen, is that they plan to increase diesel subsidy to farmers, reschedule crop loans, as well as interest subvention on advances in drought or low rain areas. Is that a good, sensible first step?
See, I think this is a routine which has sort of developed recently. I'm not entirely sure that the mix is always right, or that the timing of each of these interventions should come together. I think, as Devendra said, I think what we should be concentrating first on is actually saving whatever crop that we can. Second, doing everything that we possibly can to prevent undue effect on livestock. And third is to actually look at the livelihood of people after the event. So at the moment, I think for the pure purpose of protective irrigation, if a certain amount of subsidy is necessary, it's okay.
Okay.
But much more important is the management of whatever water resources you have, as well as the stock of seeds which may be required if crops have to be resown.
Okay.
Which is really very likely.
Let me bring you in at that point, Mr. Sharma. You made the great point that, in fact, beyond just protecting crops, there is the bigger, deeper concern about the livelihood of people. And after all, something like 60+% of India, in one way or another, are dependent on agriculture or agriculture-related services. What are the urgent steps the government needs to take to ensure that their livelihood, this is the majority of the country, their livelihood isn't badly affected?
Well, I think, Karan, let's see, if I read the newspapers today and I find that all the finance ministers, state finance ministers who met the finance minister, Mr. Arun Jaitley, all complained, they joined hands and said that the land acquisition law is not perfect, and so therefore we must dilute the land or amend the land acquisition law. But I think no one actually talked about crop insurance. Crop insurance, we have been talking it for all these years and nothing has been done on crop insurance. And if you look at Maharashtra, we now have crop insurance which actually benefits the companies rather than the growers. Horticulture producers are up in arms saying that this benefits.
Can I stop you there? Is crop assurance something they can do in time for this year? Concentrate on this year.
Also, I want to say, after all, agriculture is the mainstay of the economy, Karan. Now, all times, if you remember 2008, 2009, when the economic meltdown happened, we provided a stimulus of 3 lakh crores to the industry, which extended for 3-4 years. Now, when the agriculture is in crisis, why can't we provide a stimulus of at least 1 lakh crore to agriculture to really stimulate the agriculture growth, to really bail out the farmers, to ensure that the livelihood is not in distress or in deep pit. That is, I think, what we need to do. Let's take that initiative once for all, because after all, that will trigger off the entire thing for the general economy also. If people have money in their hands in the rural areas, that will benefit the industry.
All right. What about something else, Mr. Swaminathan? I believe you're back with us. To what extent does the government need to use its enormous buffer stocks of grain and rice to ensure that, in fact, food prices don't go up and that doesn't spiral off inflation even further?
Well, the last part of the question was not audible. May I say that one of the very important requirements is that climate risk minimizing agronomy. This requires also seed banks of alternative crops which are more tolerant to erratic weather. Unfortunately, we have shifted. Farmers always adopted a more risk minimizing agronomy. We have now shifted to profit maximizing agronomy. In that process, we have also magnified risks. I would say now that we have the era of climate change with more unpredictable weather, difficulty of forecasting, we should go and build seed banks of alternative crops in many of these high risk prone areas.
Very quickly, I'm going to go to you, Professor Sen, to put that question which sadly Dr. Swaminathan couldn't hear. To what extent is this a moment for India to use its buffer stocks of grain so that we ensure food prices don't go up? Give me a quick, short, sharp answer.
We have to. I mean, the point is that we have to actually use the stocks we have in a manner which is best suited to killing off any spikes which might arise, either because of local shortages or because of expectations which arise from the fact that programs like yours might actually make people think there will be this huge shortage.
What about the point made by Devinder Sharma a moment ago that this is a moment for the government to put 1,000 crore or actually 1 lakh crore into agriculture to provide a stimulus, A, to ensure livelihoods, and B, to give a stimulus to the economy as well, particularly at the agricultural rural level? A quick one on that, because you're a former member of the Planning Commission. Given the state of the finances, would you be in favor?
There's a strong case to spend more money on agriculture. It is not necessary that it has to be spent only when we have drought. And I think there are other implications of spending money too quickly at one point of time.
So in other words, one needs to think carefully about this proposal.
I agree that about this proposal, spend 100,000 crores this year? No way.
No way. Okay, let me come back to you, Mr. Sharma. I want to move away and talk about something else. What sort of impact do you think this monsoon deficiency would have on Mr. Modi's hopes of reviving growth and reviving economic activity in the country? Is this a worrying dampener, or is it just one of those problems that will take in our stride? Because remember, even when 4 years ago we had a monsoon deficiency in an increase of 20%, still in that year, agricultural GDP did grow, although only marginally. So how much of a dampener would this be to Mr. Modi's hopes of reviving the economy? A quick answer.
Well, I don't think we should be worried about dampness as far as the GDP growth is concerned, because I think this is a natural disaster that awaits us, or a natural challenge that awaits us, and I think every government has to prepare itself to fight that challenge. Modi's government is not going to last for next 3 months only. He's there for 5 years, so I think that can pick up later. But I think more important is to provide an economic stimulus to the farming community. I would little differ from my friend Abhijit Sen, because I think why are we treating agriculture with a stepmotherly kind of a treatment? We give everything to industry, but when it comes to agriculture, we are saying no, it can't be possible. I think that is where we need to really focus on, put all our energies. Everything else can wait, but not agriculture. And I'm sure Swaminathan would agree with me on that.